Great. Well, welcome everybody. It's 4 o'clock. I think I'll go ahead and get started. So welcome. We're so glad that you could join us and explore the extraordinary legacy of Pueblo Pottery with us this afternoon with Charles King. We, of course, hope that you and your families and communities are staying safe and healthy during this time of social distancing. My name is Sarah Payne. I'm the Chief Outreach Officer at Crow Canyon, and I will serve as your moderator for this event. And we have, let's see, hold on just a moment. And need to advance. There we go. All right. So welcome to Zoom. Some of you might be new to Zoom, and there are a few tips and tricks that we can play with here. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A box, and that icon can be used to enter any questions that you might have. We're going to save the questions till the end of the webinar, but feel free to enter those during the hour, and I'll be your moderator, so I will monitor those questions and ask them at the end. If you have any trouble with the streaming on Zoom, you can always hop over to the Facebook page where we're streaming it live, and we're also live on the King Galleries page. If you happen to miss this event, you can certainly share it with your friends and family on our YouTube channel, which also has all of our previous recordings. So that's a nice feature to have in case you miss it. Okay. All right, up next week, we have another Four Corners lecture series event that is brought to you by the Southwest Colorado Canyons Alliance. And we'll be viewing a film by Cloudy Ridge Productions about the Cedar Mesa Perishables Project. So it's a pretty interesting way to look at a film, and we have lots of collaborators who will provide a panel discussion, including the filmmaker himself. And the webinar will only be available for 24 hours on our YouTube channel. So if it's at all possible to watch the event live, you'll want to register for that and watch it next Thursday at 4 o'clock. Of course, we also are trying to connect everybody to our campus, and one fun way to do that will bring you a smile is to check out our Marmot Cam. Our mission marmots are pretty fun, and they've taken over our campus since many of us are working remotely. So that is sure to bring you a smile. So check that out when you have a chance. And also want to have a gratitude moment here and take a moment to thank all of the staff members behind the scenes that are providing us with a virtual platform that allows us to connect with one another across the miles. I also want to thank the guest speakers who are donating their time and energy and providing unique and thought-provoking discussions for us every week. And also want to thank you all, our Crow Canyon community, for supporting this effort and tuning in every week and donating to keep the programs going. We are so grateful for your support. Those of you who are familiar with Crow Canyon and the work we do know that we have a unique and important mission. For those of you who are new, the mission of Crow Canyon is to empower present and future generations by making the human past accessible and relevant through archaeological research, experiential education, and American Indian knowledge. So if you have a chance, we have a lot of research on our website, and you can visit us at www.crowcanyon.org. Please join us in the acknowledgments of Indigenous cultures, as well as the Indigenous cultures of the American Southwest that have resided on these lands in the past, as well as the descendant communities today. The work that we do at Crow Canyon would not be possible without recognizing and honoring the many generations of people that we learn from every day. As you may have heard, Native communities have been greatly impacted by COVID-19, and we're sharing information for how to support organizations who are dedicated to providing some relief to our friends and neighbors. It's now my pleasure to introduce you to Charles King. Charles is a nationally recognized specialist in American Indian pottery and the owner of King Galleries in Scottsdale, Arizona and Santa Fe, New Mexico. For many years, Charles has worked closely with leading artists in the Southwest, including Virgil Ortiz, Luann Tafoya, Grace Medicine Flower, Tammy Garcia, Russell Sanchez, and Nathan Youngblood. Charles has been a judge at the Santa Fe Indian Market, the Heard Museum Indian Market, and Gallup Intertribal Ceremonials. He has written books on Margaret Tafoya, Tony Day, Virgil Ortiz, and most recently, a book titled Spoken Through Clay. Charles has served on a scholar for several of our cultural explorations programs at Crow Canyon, and we are excited for him to share his area of expertise with you. Charles, welcome. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, and I will turn it over to you.
Awesome. So thanks, Crow Canyon, for letting me do this presentation. A lot of you may know me from the gallery. Some of you may know me from Crow Canyon. We had some really great trips to the Pueblos. For those of you that don't know me, I've had the gallery for about 25 years. My parents had one when I was growing up, so I've been involved in native art for a long time. And what I thought we would talk about today, and in a little bit different manner, I think, than what they've done with some of these, is we're going to have a hands-on discussion of Pueblo pottery, looking at actual pieces, and really starting to talk a little bit about where the designs come from and some of the different areas. So I'm going to talk about Hopi Pottery, Wingate Pottery, San Ildefonso Pottery, Attila, and Cochiti. We'll see if we have enough time for everything, but hopefully we will. So we've got, we'll get started now. So we're going to start with Hopi Pottery. And for those of you that are familiar with Hopi Pottery, one of the contemporary work today is really based on Sukiyaki Pottery. So this is not a Sukiyaki pot. I don't have any prehistoric, pre-contact vessels here, but this is one by a contemporary potter, Bobby Silas. And he probably does the most realistic contemporary versions of Sitkiyaki pieces. So one of the things that we see that's interesting about what Nampeo would have seen in the late 1800s when Fuchs began excavating the Sitkiyaki ruin is this combination of sort of stylized designs and these kind of shapes which we associate with Hopi pottery today, with these wide shoulders and flat tops to them. But it's really the designs that become sort of interest to us, and certainly were probably of most interest to Nampeo. She would send her husband Lesso down to draw the designs at night after the excavations. You can see things like the design right here, where we have eagle tail designs, things that are broken up. So it was from these stylized designs that Nampeo would have begun to make her own pottery. And that's the interesting part, is how she evolved the work from what she would have seen on Sitkiyaki pieces and starting to create design work that was really her own. So you see this stylized bird here that she would have created in the late 1800s. And what becomes really interesting as well in someone like Nampeo is not just that she's a revivalist, that she's looking back at pottery from the 14 or 1500s, but she begins to create her own style within that same context. And what she does, which is really interesting, is she begins to deconstruct the designs. So as opposed to having a single bird like we just saw, here she takes the bird, breaks it all apart, where you have the bird head, the bird wing, the bird tail. She really rethinks and creates her own design imagery. And one of the things when we talk about Hopi pottery and we think that it's Sitkiyaki revival, in many ways it's really Nampeo revival pottery. She's recreated these designs in her own style, and that's what becomes sort of the design imagery used on more contemporary work. And we can see that right here. So in a piece like this by Steve Lucas, he's followed that exact same style of Nampeo of breaking apart the imagery, like he's done here with these birds, deconstructed it in much the same way that Nampeo deconstructs the designs on her pieces. And even more to the point, someone like Les Naminga has deconstructed them even more. I know we have a little bit of shine on it. But here, if we look closer, if I can get it out of the light, you can see that he's used all these different Hopi birds, like we saw in Nampeo's, but modernized it even more. So it's this continual process that we see of looking back not only at Sukiyaki work, but primarily at Nampeo work that inspires what we see going on in a lot of Hopi pottery today. Now, one of the designs that's probably most famous in Hopi is one that really comes from more ancient pottery. So one of the things I'm going to use here are these. So I apologize. I was going to go with PowerPoint, but I decided we would just do some print off. We could really talk about some of these designs. So what you're seeing here is Salado or Gila pottery from Arizona, from the 13 and 1400s. Take a look at this design here. And then take a look at this design here. If that looks familiar to any of you, it's probably because it's the same design that we see on Hopi pottery here. And most likely, Nampeo, who started to do this migration pattern or birdwing design, probably had seen some prehistoric, some ancient versions of the Gila and Salado pottery and incorporated that design work into her pieces. And the same here when we look at a more detailed migration pattern from Dextra Nampeo. Again, you see that same imagery utilized here, coming from even further back than just the Sitkiyaki pottery. So the next thing we're going to talk about, as we're sort of moving along here, is Wingate pottery. So when we look at Wingate pottery, we see pieces like this that were done in the 1880s, where they had a tan polished face and a red polished top. There were pieces that would have been reduction fired to turn them black, but it was really this color combination at Wingate that was the most common. Wingate is an interesting one because while there were a lot of these pots made around the 1880s, turn of the century, that style quickly died out. And it wasn't until the 1930s that you had a group of 8 Wingate potters who began a revival process. And what they did was they were actually kind of an interesting group. They were a group of seamstresses, and they were a sewing club, and they decided they were going to make their own style of pottery. So one of the things they were inspired by is looking at this sort of incised designs, which was taken from a more ancient style of pottery called patsui. So they decided to take that patsui incised imagery, which was primarily on gray pottery, and put it onto contemporary pieces. But the one thing they wanted to continue was this coloration. They felt this was really important. So they would have a tan bottom and red top, and utilizing that as a tan center with red and red on the bottom. So they wanted to continue that same idea within the San Juan context. Now, kind of an interesting addition to that is this bowl here. So at Santa Clara Pueblo, which is near Wingate, this red and tan style, if they had been doing it, had really died out. And it wasn't until the 1960s that Margaret Tafoya revived that at Santa Clara. And it's an interesting story about how she started to do the red and tan pieces. When she was younger, her brother married into Wingate and moved there. and it was fairly often that she would go and visit the Pueblo. And in the 1960s, her daughter, Mary Esther Archuleta, married into Wingate and moved there. And she thought she wanted to start making pottery. So what was she going to make? Margaret suggested she start doing Wingate revival pottery. And that's when Margaret said, oh, well, she knew how to do the red and tan polishing. So the tan, which is a water slip, and the red, which is the red clay slip, Margaret began doing that on her pottery as part of her own revival. You can see how she was able to capture that same coloration that we see. Now today, there's more potters from Santa Clara that do the red and tan combination, and that in itself has continued to evolve beyond Wingate through this moment of revival with Margaret DeFoya's pottery. So when we're talking about Santa Clara pottery, one of the things thought I would point out. So we know this is a piece of Santa Clara pottery from the early 1900s. So one of the things that we know is that there's blackware that's being made at the turn of the century at Santa Clara and Wingate and at San Ildefonso. The blackware pottery is similar to the red, except at the very end it's reduction fired to turn it black. One of the real innovations that we will talk about is at San Ildefonso and Maria and Julian creating the black on black style. So we'll talk about this in a number of contexts. So amazingly, it is just about 100 years ago this year, in 1920, in July, the very first piece of their black on black pottery was exhibited here in Santa Fe. So the process to do this black on black style is that the piece was polished and designs are painted onto the surface. It took Julian about 2 years to create the process by which he reduced the firing temperature and firing time so the piece would stay shiny and this design work would stay there. What's really interesting though is where did some of these designs come from? They're not necessarily a repetition of earlier San Ildefonso designs. One of the things we'll take a look at is this is a piece of Mimbres pottery. So there was a lot of Mimbres pottery from southern New Mexico. Look at this feather pattern here and see this black band, which is the central vent of the feather, and that it's in the very center. When we look at Julian's pieces, it's the exact same thing. So the style and imagery that he was creating certainly probably had some inspiration from things that were going on in Mimbres pottery. You can certainly see how that style began to influence some of his work. The Mimbres pottery in general, for those of you that are familiar, so the pieces that I'm going to show are ones that are have been more or less approved. But Mimbres was pottery from southern New Mexico. They were these bowls. They were painted with these very intricate and very complex designs. Using the fine line imagery, here you can see, this is one that we used in the Tony Day book. Here you can see the fine line work on a horned lizard. And of course then by later in the 1960s, more and more artists started to take a closer look at what was going on with the Mimbres pottery. Tony Day is probably one of the most famous. Tony went to school in Silver City, which is around where Mimbres was. And one of the things that he said is that the key to all the pottery is in the Mimbres. He was fascinated by it. And in the course of his career, he started to recreate his own style and own version of Mimbres pottery. Not replicating it in the same sense, as that's exactly what we would see, but he started to create these fascinating, called spirit animals, with the hoof designs, the animal going backwards. But you can certainly see where he was deriving inspiration from the Mimbres pieces. He started making pieces like this in 1967. By 1970, more potters had caught on to doing membraised pottery. And here you can see one by Joseph Lono from 1972. And again, he's taken that same idea. Joseph was equally fascinated with membraised pottery, membraised designs, and began to incorporate them into his pieces as well. And we also see membraised beginning to be used at ACMA. So in the 1950s and 60s, it was Lucy Lewis, who went to Santa Fe, and Chapman, who's one of the directors at School of American Research, showed her some membraised pottery, and she began to use membraised pottery as a revival design work on ACMA pieces. So one of the interesting parts, kind of moving along, is we're going to talk a little bit more now about San Ildefonso pottery. So one of the interesting aspects of San Ildefonso pottery is there's certainly this interesting revival of it a little bit earlier on than just Maria doing the black on blackware. And that's kind of a fascinating aspect right now. There seems to be a lot of really great research going on. One of the people that potters like Tonino Roybal were really fascinated with was Nampeo. And so we really start to look back, and I think as we look at research more, we really start to understand how impactful a potter like Nampeo was on her contemporaries. When we're looking at changes at San Ildefonso in the 1920s, Nampeo had already been famous for 20, 30 years. She was at Fred Harvey Company and at the Grand Canyon. One of the pieces I wanted to look at is this one by Nampeo. And it's one of her famous eagle tail designs. And one of the things is the way she puts it together, sort of her own inspiration, where you have this four-part setup with the tails extending downward and the wings coming up onto the side. And it's interesting how potters like Tonino Roybal from San Ildefonso, she was fascinated as well by a lot of Nampeo's work. And you can see on this bowl, you can see that the setup and design is set up in a manner that's definitely inspired by Nampeo's work. And I think that's an interesting attribute that's really positive, that you have these potters that are looking at someone who's become so famous and are mesmerized and fascinated by her artistry, and then are able to use it and recreate it in their own style. So it isn't a duplication. It certainly is conceptually the same with a tail design and a wing design, or own additions onto space here. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about San Ildefonso pottery. So I have a special guest for this. So I'm going to step aside because I have to put my mask on. But we are going to have Russell Sanchez, who is probably one of the top potters working today. Probably. Russell is one of the top potters working today. Russell is well known for his innovative designs using various colored clay slips and also reviving historic imagery and clays in his pieces. In the last year, he was really involved in an amazing exhibit that's up at the Museum of Indian Arts and Culture. And he was, he was a major part of having that come together, doing research. So I asked him if he would come by today. So he's been sitting well at a distance over there. I'm going to step aside. He's going to come up here, and we're going to have him talk a little bit about San Ildefonso pottery and contemporary work.
Hello, everyone. Hope you're doing well. I'm Russell Sanchez, as Charles said. I'm from San Ildefonso Pueblo, so just talk a little bit about San Ildefonso work and the influence it's had on my work as well as other potters' work today. At San Ildefonso, a lot of the revivals started with potters like this, Del Pino. Notice the wide bodies and the flared neck. A lot of that had to do to balance the pot, so they could actually carry them like that. But as far as design work goes, you see a lot of elements that are still used today, like the mountain designs, the cloud designs, the storm patterns on the side. And so it's the same exact materials that we use today. Here you have another piece by Florentino and them. I believe it's by Florentino and Martina. You've got plant design squash blossoms coming out right there. You can notice them blooming outward with a rain pattern up here. Notice the shape and the form of the neck here. That's one of the things that I've taken on my pots to make them some of my own styles. Over here, you have another incredible job by Florentino, painted by Florentino. Notice the intricacies of the designs here. You've got two serpent heads coming together. When you turn it this way, it turns into a moth design. Over here, you've got stripes with the dots in there and the patterns. And these are patterns that have been used for quite some time on San Alfonso pots. But the thing with a lot of these potters is they've taken those designs, even back then, and reinterpreted and deconstructed and reconstructed. We have this saying at home with a lot of the old potters. They say, take what is mine and make it yours. Meaning, don't copy what I'm doing. Be inspired by what I'm doing and come up with something new. And again, they all have this base. And that's so they can be stabilized, so they can carry them on their heads, or when they put them on a mud floor, they could easily hold water. And then we move on to something like Blue Corn, who started this in the 50s and 60s, a revival of polychrome. When she first started, she had difficulty with the slips of bonding to the clay. So she went through several pits to find the right clays that would bond. Here again, you have a members design, feather design, with the clouds getting ready to burst their storms up on top. Very nice piece. And then we go on to one of my styles, which is a modern version of an old pot. You could call it a gourd pot, or at home they used to call them chimney pots because they would stack broken pots on top of each other to make sure that the smoke would come up properly. So this is my version of a red on black, which was done before the blackware hit. Then we lead up to one of my newer pieces, which is my interpretation of a polychrome pot. Here again, you have the checkerboard design, you've got the sun faces, and the two snakes coming together. There's a difference between snakes and water serpents, whereas the water serpent, there's only one, and he's a male. And with the snakes, you have the snakes coming from the four directions, which bring the rain down, and they come to the village, take the prayer feathers, and go back to the four directions to take our prayers there. So this would be my interpretation of a jar, so very much like this, you can tell. It's even got the indentation on the bottom. And like Charles said, I helped curate the pottery show up at San Alfonso, Mayak, and we have over 130 pieces in there, and it took us like 3 years to get all that information together. And what we discovered was that there was so many more potters before Maria that helped get this movement started in San Alfonso. So if it weren't for that group of potters, we wouldn't be where we are today. So I'll come back in a bit, but I'll give you back to Charles.
So I want to thank Russell. I think this was a really unique opportunity for us. He's really become one of the leading experts on historic San Alfonso pottery. I'm fascinated with it. Russell really has created this unique opportunity to generally teach me a little bit more about what's going on in San Alfonso. And it's quite extraordinary to think that the same materials here are the same materials here. And Russell has really, the whole idea of evolving the work and yet maintaining that cultural integrity is certainly well bound within the work that he's doing. So the next area we're going to talk about, sort of moving right along, is some Acma pottery. So I want to thank, I'm not sure if I did it at the beginning, but Al Anthony at Adobe Gallery was very kind to loan me some pots. So I do not have a lot of we don't have historic pieces usually in the gallery. but he was really kind to lend me an Acknowledgment jar from the 1880s. And one of the things, what I wanted to be able to talk about with this piece is the four colors, which was something that was pretty common at the time, these rainbow designs, but also the birds. So check out the two different kinds of birds that you see on here. This one, and then the parrot. So of course, everybody's always fascinated with the parrots. One of the reasons we see the parrots show up on Acoma and other pottery, part of it is that there historically have been parrots in the Southwest, but parrots were also traded through Central and South America, and parrot feathers were highly prized. And obviously in different pueblos and at Hopi, there's parrot clans. So there's something that was very much common to different pueblos, definitely part of cultural life. So it's these parrots that we see on some of the early Acoma pottery in a lot of this color. What's interesting is that Acoma pottery really started to die down by the 1920s. And it wasn't until the 1970s that we start seeing this four colors show back up. I know Richard Spivey said that he was the one who was helped to do the revival, but Rick Dillingham also said he helped to do the revival. But I think it was as much artists being interested in it, but as collectors and gallerists, like those two, challenging them to revive and bring back some of those ideas, and the artists meeting and exceeding that expectation. But just to give you an idea of where contemporary work has gone, here's one with the parrots as well. I have a lot of big pots for this example. But this is one by Barbara and Joseph Serna. And you can see how they've used four colors, used the same parrots, and this wonderful sort of evolution of the work over time. And one of the things with Acoma pottery is not just the historic pieces and things like the parrots, but just as we talked about earlier with Lucy Lewis looking back at Mimbres pottery, she also looked back at a lot of Chaco pottery. And so did a lot of Acoma potters, and for that black and white colorations that they used in their pieces. So here's a piece from Chaco Canyon. Check out this sharp angular design, these fine line patterns. And of course, one of the most famous is Lucy Lewis, who took that same lightning design and turned it into one of her more classic patterns that she would use on her pottery. And today, this jar by Robert Petruccio continues that same coloration, not just black and white, but using fine line patterns and really taking this inspiration from pottery from Chaco in their imagery. And I think it's fascinating that as we're looking at Acoma pottery and sort of this continual evolution in various trends, to look at someone like Frederica Antonio. So she has the black and white, like the Chaco pieces, the four color, like Acoma, and this continual sort of reinterpretation of two different styles within Acoma pottery. So one of the other styles that we see at Acoma, and it's become more of a trend recently as a revival, and it's based on these. So most of you probably know exactly what these are. These are these cylindrical jars are ones that came from Chaco, and they're the famous chocolate jars. So of course, for a long time, nobody knew what they were used for. They found them in the hundreds. And of course, there's the great story of how they finally did the testing on the inside to discover that they were chocolate jars. As you can see again, these fine line designs, these black and white patterns. So when we have someone like Robert Petruccio recreating them, he's following, not reproducing in the same way, but taking inspiration from those historic shapes and historic designs. It was interesting because Robert told me when he was making these that they actually, this style of handle, the curve here they would actually use these at times, and these would hold up, using 4 of these, hold it up over a fire for heating something up. And so that's where he came up with that style of handle for his pieces. So I know we've gone through a lot of pottery today. We still have a few more things to go, so I'm trying to make sure that I'm not going too fast, but that we're talking about a lot of different things. So one area of pottery that's really, I'm really fascinated with one of the potters, in addition to San Ildefonso pieces, is Cochiti Pottery. Again, another piece that Al from Adobe Gallery let me borrow. I think this is pretty fascinating. So we have a turn of the century Cochiti pot. Check out the design work. So it's all white clay slip, which is bentonite, painted with beeweed. Look at this design. It has sort of this modernist feel to it. This plant and wild spinach design, the alternating from either side. So of course, today, one of the most famous of the Cochiti potters is Virgil Ortiz. And what's interesting about his pieces is, much like Russell doing his work in the polychrome, these are the exact same materials. And not just that, but Virgil takes a fascinating use of these same design elements and reinterprets them onto his own pieces. So a jar like this has a butterfly on one side, has a badger, which is Virgil's name in Charis, on the other side. It's fascinating, the sort of similarity in use of same design patterns. And more to the point, I think when he does contemporary work, it's even more fascinating to see how all of these smaller aspects figure into pieces like one of his Saints and Sinners pots. So he's continually looking back, and even in the most modernized version, maintaining same materials, same colors, same slips. You can see the red on the inside, the red on the inside, but really following through into his own designs and still honoring that connection to the historic pottery. That's it. I think we did pretty good. I wanted to get through about 40 minutes worth of talking about pottery and Pueblo pottery and some of the historic trends. And I thought now we could answer some questions. If you guys have any questions for me, or I can always step away. Probably have more interesting questions for Russell because he knows much more about Sinai pottery than I do.
Wonderful. Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Russell. It's so exciting to see you. I am surprised. It's so exciting to have you both live with us. So thank you. We do have a few questions that we can get started with.
Okay.
Let's go back to the very beginning with the Sitkiyaki pottery. There was a jar that appeared to have white spaces on it and a matte finish, whereas the Nampeo pots shown seem to have polished a finish all over it. So was the Sitkiyaki jar shown first? Was it polished with a stone, or are the white parts of it just sanded surface or a white slip that was left unpolished?
You're probably asking about this. So, like I said, this is one of Bobby Silas's pieces. It's a contemporary version of Sitkiyaki, but it is not polished. So it is just coil built, and then the designs are painted onto the surface. Nampeo canteen. Painted onto the surface, and then what he would do with his, which was what they did with Sukiyaki pottery at the time, is it's lignite coal fired. So that creates a sort of more white coloration to it. What Nampeo did with her pieces is what Hopi potters do today. They're stone burnished, they're fired with sheep manure instead of lignite. So it's not as hot of a firing, and you create more of this yellow coloration that we associate with with Hopi Pottery today. Hopefully that answered your question.
Yes. And there was a question about Nampeo pottery and whether or not Steve Lucas is a descendant of Nampeo.
He is. So Dexter Kutskova, so Nampeo had 4 daughters, I think. But Dexter Kutskova is a great-great-granddaughter of Nampeo's through Annie. Dexter was born in 1928 and she just passed away last year. But it was Dexter Kutskova who, you grab the Steve Lucas and the Dexter, who taught Steve Lucas, Les Naminga, Heisi Kutskova, Lauren Omi. She taught all of them to do pottery. Dexter is a pretty fascinating person. A lot of you may be familiar with her son, Dan Naminga, who's a famous painter. This is a piece by Dexter. So one of the things that when I was working on Spoken Through Clay, I had this really great opportunity to spend some time with Dexter. She said when she first started making pottery, there were 7 designs. That's all she could do. You couldn't do anything different. That this amazing creativity of Nampeo had kind of codified itself into just 7 designs. So the migration pattern was one of those patterns. But she also told these really great stories about Nampeo that, as many of you may know, that old lady Nampeo Pana, was pretty much blind by the time that she, as in maybe 1920s, 19-teens. And so Dexter said that she was born in 28. Nampeo lives until 1949. And she said she would go see Nampeo, and Nampeo would touch her ankles, and she would say, "Oh, you're the one with the fat ankles." I think that was the story. That's how she would identify her. But Steve Lucas, this is one of Steve's pieces, and this is actually a tribute jar where he created a design that's really stylized, but one that we see on Dexter's work. But yeah, so he is a nephew of Dexter, so he would be about a 4th generation from Nampeo Pana.
Lovely. And then another question about whether or not the revivalists had access to the pieces that are now collected by museums.
I probably could have Russell answer that. I think for the most part, I think museums are incredibly good about trying to let artists in and let, I think them asking Russ, I think Mayak is just a perfect example. And I give them great credit that Museum of Indian Arts and Culture, doing the San Ildefonso show, they called on Russell not just as a resource, but as a curator. And I think he learned as much being around those pots as they learned from him. I think it was an incredible 2-way street. And I think more museums are really drawing in artists, inviting them in, having them be able to talk about the pieces and teach more people about the historic background to them. I think Russell has done an incredible job teaching me and letting more people know about San Ildefonso pottery and changing really how we're looking at it. I mean, in the last year, it's been extraordinary that the amount of information that he's helped to provide to give us a new look at San Ildefonso and their culture and the pottery. So I think I got a thumbs up from him across the room that he thinks museums as well are doing overall, at least here in Santa Fe, a really great job of bringing artists in to give them access to those older pieces.
Great, thank you. And if we could go back to the Dexter pot briefly, could you point out which one is the migration design?
So this whole thing is the migration design. So Dexter, so when we looked earlier, and what I was trying to point out is the migration design is really sort of based on these bird wing patterns. So it could actually be considered like a bird migration. And when we were looking at those historic pieces, you can see the same bird wing design here that you're seeing here, right? But the story evolved and the story changed. And so I suspect that, we see the migration pattern being used by Nampeo Hana, and over time the stories evolve. So I know for Dexter, by the time she was doing these migration pieces, for her, it was all of these lines which were, she said she had to paint, and it was connecting people because it told this story of migration of people around the world, of people coming together. So she had this really, I can't even repeat it because it's just this really beautiful story. I think I've got it on the website about what the migration pattern meant to her. But it is sort of this entire pattern, much like the eagle tail and others of the 7 that she was allowed to make.
Great, thank you. Another question here about younger people learning to make pottery and what that looks like today.
I wish there were more younger potters making pottery. I suppose, would you say the same thing, Russell?
Yeah, I really do wish there were more, and there are a lot more that dabble in it, but because of finances and how life is today, you got to pay bills.
So I think that's it. I think there are a lot fewer that do it full time. But I think one thing I would say from the gallery end is that those who really are artists and really have this commitment to it, they kind of find the way to make it work. And man, they are the younger potters that we have the opportunity to work with are extraordinary. And I think that they really are excited about it. And I think they're really pushing to continue on using same materials. But like Russell, the saying from his great aunt, take this and make it your own. I think they're really following through on that and taking the concepts and the ideas, using native clay and making the work their own. And I think I don't see it as a dying art at all. I see it as a very live and lively art. I just think that it's just we look at today how much a lesson of Minga pot with the acrylic is so different than a Sukiyaki piece or one of Dextra's or one of Nampeo's. I think what we're going to see in 20 years is, going to look totally different than what we're looking at today. You know what? I think that's okay. I think that's pretty exciting. I think
the way we look at it at some of the concepts is that in order to maintain being traditional and keeping your tradition alive, you move forward with it. You don't remain stagnant and then in the past, but you bring it up to the now and the now. And you start things to your way and what life is like today.
I couldn't say it any better. I think Russell absolutely has his finger on why that is culturally so important.
And Charles, can you actually reiterate?
You know what? I'm going to have.
Yeah.
Come up here. He was talking with his mask on from a distance. I'm going to have him repeat that. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Russell, if you wouldn't mind, we would love to hear what you said. Sometimes the speaker's a little difficult when it's further away, but that would be great.
What I was saying is that for us, being that we're a very, very traditional Pueblo, tradition means living in the now and moving forward, not being stuck in the past and not being repetitive with your work or your culture. What's past is past. And if you want to survive, then you create and you add to that tradition. You move forward. You keep stepping forward, keep walking. It's like they tell us, don't walk the same path, create your own path. So that's basically what we're doing. You take the same materials, techniques, designs, and reinterpret them for your own and for the now.
Excellent. And so there is a question that came in that I think sort of reinforces that point, but the idea of reinterpretation has been mentioned quite a lot over the past hour. So would you guess that older pottery designs are commonly reinterpreted to have new meanings by later potters?
Would they have new meanings?
Pretty much.
I'm going to let Russell answer that one.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's an interesting question of whether it would have a new meaning or it would have the same meaning but just reinterpreted. I think that's a really interesting one. I'm going to
Well, I don't think it would have a new meaning. It would be pretty much the same type of meaning, but the way you think about it. It's like with the designs that we saw in Santa Pots, they all had the same elements, but each person that did it had their idea of what it should mean. One person would draw a serpent one way, somebody else another way. Somebody would do a leaf pattern one way and somebody else another way. If you've got something that has a storm pattern, somebody say, this is my idea of a dark sky with the clouds getting to break. And then another potter would take that same design and just totally change it up. Something that I do. And you see that a lot with the potters at San Alfonso from the late 1800s to the early 1900s, which we call the revival period. Because without that small group of potters, we really wouldn't be where we are today. And if you go to the show at Mayak, you see an incredible amount of different styles of work.
Excellent. Thank you, Russell. Yes, that's great. And then it looks like I have one more. And in your opinion, Charles, which potters would you recommend as must-haves for the collector? And there's sort of a two-part question, because the other part of the question would be, what resources might you have on your website that can provide some educational components for the legacy of pottery?
So one of the things on the website that I would highly encourage people to do, we've been putting together some really great videos on various artists, and we're going to have more and more as we're going along. And I think the videos really tell a great story about the artists, as well as some of the historic ones. I've done one on Tony Day, one on the century of San Ildefonso black on black pottery. So I would suggest looking at the videos, each one of the artist bios as well. I spent a lot of time putting that together, but even more so because at a certain point, who cares? You know, I mean, we're fascinated by awards, but you want to know something more. Every time we list something on there, it isn't always, it's not about buying. Not about buying. It really is about, I try and tell a story, and I talk to the artist. I want to be the conduit of telling the right story. So when Russell brings in a piece, I sit down, we talk about it, we talk about things he's thinking about, and we try and add that information onto the website so that it becomes a learning process on a continual basis. So you can go on, you know, if you want to just search things, you can search by a name, you know, look at it for an Avanu or look for black on black, or you can type in anything you want and you can find any of the pieces that you want. In terms of artists, the one thing that I would say is really important right now, and it's one of the things that I find important for the gallery, as much as I love having historic work and things like 20 Days, we're really trying to make a commitment in the midst of everything that's going on with COVID and everything that's happening, of buying from contemporary artists. And so I would encourage you at the moment to really help support contemporary artists. Through the gallery, we're doing that of having events, even if, like we are for Indian market, our Indian market this year, which was canceled. But while we won't have a lot of the artists here, just to protect them, we will do things through Zoom. We do have the videos, and we're really continuing to get that story across. So my suggestion is, as opposed to who's the best artist, which artist should you do? I like everybody's work that I have in the gallery. But what I would tell you is, find a style you like, find work that you like. You know, if you like painted ware, or you like Hopi, or you like San Ildefonso or Santa Clara, you're extraordinary artists, each one of these, each one of the pueblos. And once you find a style that you like, start looking at different artists and what makes theirs unique. You know, someone like Russell, I've known him since I was in high school, and I've watched his work evolve and change for, you know, 40. I don't say how many years. I guess I should say how many years. You know, for a long period of time. You know, I'm lucky to count him as a friend, but I'm also fascinated watching his journey as an artist and continually evolving and changing and contemplating his art beyond just making things. And I think that's an incredible part of what you should be looking for as well. Just repetition may not be interesting, but artists that really have a voice, how they want to talk about their art. I think as we go forward, I think that's equally as critical and important and kind of beautiful about what the art is. So I would say, you know, I don't want to say do your own research, but really take a look at what drives you, and I think you're going to find the artists that are going to meet you and make that drive even more exciting.
Absolutely. And are there certain places that one would look to learn about up and coming artists?
You know, here at the gallery every year, like during our market shows, we're constantly, as much as I'm lucky to have, you know, artists like Russell and Nathan and Nancy and other potters, I always try and include one or two younger potters so that I feel like we're always bringing them, even if it's, you know, kind of scary to be part of you know, not that we're going to have a big event this year, but I'm always on the lookout for younger artists. We always try and feature and bring younger artists onto the website. Russell and I were just talking yesterday about some of the younger San Ildefonso potters that what he's doing to help motivate them, and what we can do at the gallery to help give them a voice and a platform to show their work as well. So I think it's, you know, check out the website, because I think we're constantly trying, when I have someone new or younger that I think is doing something interesting, we try and highlight and promote their work promote people being interested in it and finding out more. Is it something that's interesting to them? And so I think galleries in general right now are a good platform for helping those artists as well.
Great, absolutely. And for the viewers, the website that we are referring to is kinggalleries.com. And I can type that into the chat too. There was also a question that came in on Facebook, and is there a catalog for the show that Russell was working on?
They don't have a catalog yet, but I think they're supposed to be working on one that might come out within the next year.
Yes, we're working on a huge book that's about the whole history of San Alfonso Pottery.
So Russell says there is a huge book that is in the works that will eventually come out about San Alfonso Pottery and the exhibit at MIAC. And it's a beautiful exhibit. I wish everybody was able to be here and be able to see it. So the book goes to publishers in December. So.
Excellent, great. And we have Ken from back east. Hi, Ken. Great to see you. Thanks for tuning in. With Russell's animal pieces, are they modern or old?
Are your animals modern or old, like your bears?
Animals?
The bears.
The bears? Well, they're based on an older style, but I modernized them a little bit. I changed the forms to.
Answer that. I'm going to let him answer because he said they're bold, so I got nothing to go with that.
They're actually based on an old style fetish. At San Alfonso, we used to use clay fetishes as well as stone. So it's based on something like that, but I've taken them and streamlined them a little bit to make them a little bit more modern, but they do have a connection to the past. Again, bringing it into the now.
Excellent. And Russell, since I have you there, there's another question about the museum show. And is this a permanent exhibit, or is this
No, but because of COVID, it's going to continue for another year.
Oh, great. Okay. So
it was going to close this year, and then they extended it for 6 months, but now it's going to continue on till next summer.
Okay, and that's at MIAC, which is the Museum of Indian
And then after
Arts
MIAC, there's another pottery show that I'm working on with Violet Foundation that's going to go in there. Drop paper.
Oh, good. I'm glad it was just paper.
But yeah, it's been great working with MIAC, and what I did with them too is I brought a lot of people in from San Alfonso, some of the older people, Descendant, so they could actually go in the vault, and they've never, ever, ever been there. And so they had access to that, and it was great to see them, their reaction to a lot of the pots that had been there. And they told stories about a lot of the older potters, their parents, their grandparents. So that was great. And that opened the door up at SAR. I'm doing work with SAR also now, as well as the Violet Foundation and MIAC. So it's fun, enjoyable, and I like it. And it's definitely been a plus for me and my work, taking me in different directions again.
Wonderful. All right. And then it also sounds like the Santa Fe Indian Market is going to go to a virtual platform this summer. Are you, Russell, involved, or is King Galleries involved with the Indian Market this year?
I don't think we're doing very much with it. It's just, it's going to be a much smaller show. And so I'm doing my show here at Charles this year.
Mm-hmm. Great. All right. Thank you. Excellent. Okay. I don't see any other questions that have come in, but thank you all for tuning in this afternoon. And thank you, Russell and Charles, for the nice surprise. I love the surprise guest. And
thank you, everybody, for taking the time to spend an hour and learn. I hope you learned a little bit more about it. And when you fill out your commentary thing, say something nice so they'll invite me back again. And I really want, one of the things right now, I mean, as much as she put up the slide, please consider donating things to the COVID relief fund at the different pueblos at Hopi and at Navajo. And please consider donating to Pro Canyon. Tell you what, they are an extraordinary place. they've been amazingly great to me. We really try and do what we can to help, and I highly encourage you to help support them as well during a really trying time. But thank you guys, and any questions you can always email me here at the gallery, and I'll do my best to see what I can come up with.
Great, wonderful. Thanks so much, Charles. Bye, everybody. We'll see you next week.